Welcome, everyone. And I'm joined today by Rebecca Magee, who is a friend and also fellow entrepreneur who I'm really excited to share with you all today. Rebecca is a creative entrepreneur, a facilitator, and a teacher focused on the intersection of gender equity and climate justice. Her background blends the study of women's leadership and health with an extensive career in environment sustainability, social impact, and philanthropy. A skillful facilitator, she's created transformative learning experiences for social impact leaders around the world and led communities of women through life changing retreats and peer groups. As the founder of Sister Seasons, Rebecca guides women and menstruators to restore their well being and our planets through cycle awareness practices and partners with organizations who are seeking to empower menstruators to lead on climate without burning out. Rebecca, is there anything that you would love to add to that beautiful bio about how you're showing up today, or anything that you'd love to share with our listeners before we jump into conversation?
Mm. As I was listening to it, I was just thinking, like, wow, there is just such a common thread for me around gathering people. Like, that is just like where my heart is. And so, yeah, I'm a gatherer by nature.
I can relate to that. I love to bring the people together in a big way.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing us? I don't always ask background questions, but I feel like you've had such a strong and storyful transition from your work in the corporate world, and it sort of informed the work that you're doing now through the creation of Sister Seasons. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and what are some of the threads that led you to the creation of Sister Seasons?
Yeah, sure. Um, in my mind, when I think about what the journey has been to this point, there's just like two very parallel paths. And then all of a sudden they intersected in a way that I never could have anticipated.
Yeah.
um, so like on the one side was like the part that I was like really intentional about and planning and was like, this is going to be my career. And that has always been in environmental sustainability. It's been something that started showing up for me really early in my life through just like literally science fair in middle school. And so that has just been a common thread for me of really being interested in climate change and environmental sustainability. And so that took me into the nonprofit sector for a while. And then I ended up in corporate, doing corporate social responsibility for a really wonderful progressive women's fashion company. And that was where a lot of things started really coming together. Once I ended up in a space that was both bringing together this environmental sustainability thread and feminine and feminist leadership. It was a wonderful incubator for me. And so that was happening, and I'll come back to that in a minute, where the moment for the intersection moment. Um, but all the while I was in this journey around environmental sustainability, I had also just been always really passionate about well-being and health. And that was just something I was doing out of curiosity. I would just get really excited or intrigued about something, whether that was yoga or Ayurveda or I think I've tried everything. So I could go on. I could list more things, but just became really interested in um, the human body and emotions and why we do the things that we do. And so I was always just learning a lot about that. And when I was around 29 or 30, started to kind of realize that me being on hormonal birth control, which I had been on for quite some time, felt really out of sync with a lot of my other values. I am not anti-hormonal birth control. It just was no longer a fit for me. That always feels really important to say. Um, and so I started preparing to come off of it and really started learning about my menstrual cycle for the first time around age 30.
Mm.
And just was overwhelmed with curiosity, rage, shame, all of the feelings that come up. And realizing like, wow, I've got a college degree, a successful career, and I have no idea what's happening in my body.
Mm.
And that was just like the rabbit hole that I ended up falling down, and really started studying everything I could get my hands on about menstrual cycles. So I started getting really interested in that, starting to try to bring it into my work a little bit. And at that time, so I'm still at this fashion company, and I was managing their philanthropy programs. And we started to look at how we might combine our environmental grant programs with our work around women's issues. And so we start doing all these interviews with people in the field. And the thing that we start to hear over and over is that women are disproportionately affected by climate change, and yet also needed more than ever. Because if we want effective solutions that actually do work for all people, we need women at the table. And when you start hearing something over and over, in every single interview that we're doing, it was just like this thing bubbling up in me that was just like, I am really fucking mad.
Mhm.
Because we're being like women we're so exhausted, we're so burnt out, and now we're being expected to save the planet that we didn't even mess up.
Mhm.
Um, and so that was really this huge aha about like how can we expect women to step up right now? Um, and worlds started to collide, and I started to see how the same thing that has happened to our planet, the same aspects of it that have been oppressed, violated, and yeah, just really pushed to the brink, has also happened to women's bodies. And there's a lot of correlations that we could get into around just correlations between the presence of extractive industries, and a rise in violence against women. The same is true when it comes to migration. So like thinking about like climate migrations, or any kind of natural disaster, you see like the violence against women rise. And it was just like, wow, okay, actually, like these two things are the same.
Mm.
Women have been oppressed in the same way that our planet has been oppressed. And what I was learning about menstrual cycles, through a lot of really pioneering menstrual cycle educators, was that you could look to nature, look to the natural seasons, and see our menstrual cycles mirrored in it. And then I thought, well, actually, this is really interesting because I'm coming from a climate perspective, and I'm seeing how the impacts of climate are also mirrored in women's period problems. And so there was just this really magical whirlpool swirl happening. And that was really how Sister Seasons was born. Yeah, was out
Mm.
of that journey.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I feel like we've talked about the creation of your business before as friends, and there's some details in there that I hadn't heard before, which I love.
Mm,
And I'm interested in, there's a few things that you said that I want to pull out as we go through our conversation. But what do you feel like you're sort of able to bring more forward or get at more deeply with Sister Seasons that you feel like your previous roles in sustainability weren't quite speaking to?
yeah. Hmm. When the idea for Sister Seasons was born, I was in a real low point yet another cycle of burnout.
Mm.
That's something I've experienced a lot in my adult life. Um, and the thing that has felt really fascinating to me about my work with Sister Seasons is how I am both allowed to have a body and that to be a part of this work. And I am making a lot of space for everyone else to also have a body in this work of building a just regenerative future, right? And it always felt really hard when I was working within organizations um, to honor my own body's needs,
Mhm.
but to also honor the my like our lived experience, our own like shifting needs, our emotions that come up. All of these are really important um, data and information that can guide us in the right direction. But it felt like it wasn't welcome there. It was almost like, when you're working in an organization, you don't want anyone to know when you're on your bleed. You
Mhm.
don't want to be the girl who's crying in the meeting because, especially when you're working in environmental sustainability, sometimes, you really would have to just like numb out because that emotion felt like it might get in the way of your work. So it's just like, okay, I'm going to, sometimes I'm going to let myself feel all the feelings. And other times I am just going to put on my, planet advocacy cap and just go in and tune that out. And I think that the more that I do this work with Sister Seasons, the more that she's teaching me a lot, the more that I know that like all of that is welcome all the time. And
Mhm.
the more that we can become aware of it, the more that we can use it in really effective ways. And you don't actually have to push it into the closet. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important to, like, how would we possibly enact change if we weren't able to bring our whole selves to the table? I'm not really sure how that's possible. I don't think that it is actually. So hearing you say that, and it makes me something that just came to mind was like Joanna Macy's work around the work that reconnects, and how like
Mm.
processing grief and dealing with grief is such a big part of how we can keep going. And that, like, numbness is not going to be a way that we can like steel ourselves. Like, there's something about softening our way into change and able to be fully present that feels like a really powerful ingredient. And a random thing that I thought about as you were sharing is that someone was sharing with me lately some statistic about just how many, um, basically that just how many, the percentage of women that are basically just like freezing their asses off at work all day. And because
Mm-hmm.
like, it's like silly things like that, where just differences in how like certain hormonal configurations like regulate temperature, and how like none of those people have control of the thermostat, and therefore how much of their nervous system is oriented towards not freezing like all day. And um just silly things like that that sort of inhibit our ability to be as present as we would like.
Yeah, 100%. And there's so many examples of that. I think one of the things that really, in those early days of um, of incubating what eventually became Sister Seasons, I was noticing, especially working in an organization that I think was 85 to 90% female, um, was how many hormonal imbalances and difficulties and sometimes disease as a result of those going unaddressed were keeping my colleagues, my friends, my family so preoccupied
Mm,
um, that here they were with such incredible gifts to share, and yet not able to have the energy or capacity to act on those or to show up for them because they're dealing with extremely painful periods, and or thyroid issues, autoimmune conditions, and it's there's definitely, it feels like this, that is just one, I think, symptom of an underlying crisis of well-being that women are experiencing, women and menstruators. I want to make sure it's very not only it's not just women who have a period. Um, so yeah, there's something happening beneath the surface that I think we haven't, as a culture, really connected the dots around, that are really keeping women and menstruators from actually. It's not just that we haven't been invited to the table. There's a lot of obstacles and barriers that are actually keeping us from ever really having the capacity
Mhm.
even to show up with the unique ways that each of us is meant to contribute to this collective evolution that we're going through right now.
Yeah. You said a word that really like jumped out at me, which is preoccupied.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think about a lot with some of the work, like in my own life and work I do with other people, and obviously in things that you do as well, like how much of our capacity, like as if there's something else we should be doing. And just the amount of sort of preoccupation, like a lot, even if in simple statistics with the amount of domestic labor or emotional labor, et cetera, that's just sort of automatically put on people, or it's like, oh, you have a period, and that's like something in the way of you doing your actual work, or oh,
Right.
you're crying about this, you're like, as opposed to feeling the actual fullness of the crisis that we're in, which could actually maybe help change a thing. It's like in the way, and so something about like shedding, and some of that I think in, not to get into like mothering in particular, but I think mothering is like an amazing, beautiful, powerful, creative thing to do, and it's not the only thing anyone ever is. And so there's such a
Mm.
stigma around being the bad mother, whether that's with like actual children or in your life, the care work, you're being bad at caring for people or whatever. And the amount of preoccupation that puts on someone, like the amount of burnout is just like astounding. That's not a question, but I just wanted to like put that at you.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I was talking to an entrepreneur friend just I think last week or so, and he was saying that a lot of people come to him when they're burnt out. And he's like, that's not a great business proposition, because if your whole audience is like too tired and too depleted to be able to take action. So he's like, yeah, I need people to come to me after they've moved through burnout. But, I think that there's just such a burnout epidemic, especially for women and menstruators, because we're constantly and oftentimes I think it's subconscious at this point, because we've so internalized that that we're not meant to trust our bodies or listen to them, that actually, yes, the information that they're giving us is an obstacle or something to be distrusted, I guess. um, that, yeah, it's like, we're constantly overriding all of this amazing information that our body is giving us, and instead we're in these contexts, these cultural systems that are not designed around our rhythms, and so we're made to feel absolutely crazy, which just reinforces all of these ideas that women are hysterical. But it's been really phenomenal for and liberatory for me personally to stop expecting myself to be the same every single day.
Mm-hmm.
It's
What a
like
revolutionary concept.
yeah. But for men, men are on a 24-hour testosterone cycle. And so as menstruators, we have some concept of what that might feel like. One, because we have a circadian rhythm, which is a 24-hour cycle, but also because we're living it every day, because that's what the 9 to 5 workday is. Um, but men don't really have a concept of what it feels like to be on a 28-ish day cycle. And so I might be, and these hormonal changes in our bodies affect our brain chemistry, our mood, our appetite, just like so many things that are not just what's happening within your reproductive or endocrine system, right? And so I can be amazing at having a conversation with you, and I can articulate all of my ideas, perfectly, whatever. And then the following week, I am just a rambly little mess because I have shifted into a different part of my cycle. And actually, what I would be better at doing, maybe, or what would feel better in my body would be other tasks, right? And so there's gifts in every single part of our cycle. We can do everything. There's not like I can't do it as a woman just because I'm in a different part of my cycle, but there are certain times of our cycle where we have that little extra ease and flow. And I think, when we're in a workplace and it's like, well, I did this part of my job really amazing last week. Why am I struggling with it so much this week? And then you start to feel, or at least in my experience, you feel like something's wrong with you, when it's just like, actually no, we're just not talking about or making space for this other rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like thank God for both of those rhythms. And also like I have moments where my partner is very much a man, and I am very grateful for the stability and sort of the way that he shows up in the world in so many, and it's so not the way that I show up. And I feel like a lot of learning to be together has been appreciating the gifts that those differences have, which I feel like the work, which is simply a microcosm of um, what we could be appreciating or facilitating or weaving into all the difference that we could be embracing on a macro or organizational
Mhm.
level, I feel like.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
um, you were talking a lot about just the interconnectivity that you were noticing between the health and the regulation of like ourselves and that with the planet. And I'm wondering some of the ways that, you do a lot of like teaching and facilitating. Like, what are some of the ways that you have really poignantly noticed those correlations? And what are some of the ways that you um, sort of enjoy steering people towards different solutions? What are the things that come forward with that interconnection?
Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. There's like so many layers to it. I think that there's like the very like simple biological connections that can illuminate a lot. I am doing a training right now to help me learn a little bit more about menstrual difficulties. So studying more hormonal imbalances and disorders. And one of the things that I've been learning in the program is just like how much um, micronutrient deficiencies can have a huge impact on like whether or not we have an easeful bleed. And that's really
Mm-hmm.
interesting because a lot of those micronutrient deficiencies are because our soils are depleted, and just because of our modern diets that where things are highly processed. And so there's just really interesting like little connections like that where you can start to see how the health and well-being of us as menstruators is very tied to what's been done to our planet. The same is true even for women and menstruators are estrogen dominant. We have estrogen receptors throughout our whole body, and our physiology is different in that we hold on to nutrients, hold on to things, because our body is like, okay, if this person is like taking in nutrients in the event of pregnancy, we want to hold on to all of that good nutrition. um, but that also means that a lot of the chemicals and toxins that we've introduced, many of them mimic estrogen called xenoestrogens. And that means that women, especially, are particularly holding on to a lot of these. And so, yeah, so there's things that are happening really on the um, physiological level of our bodies, but then you can start to also just like look at the mirrors, which is, I think, what I'm even like more interested in and drawn to. Um, because there is something that like I think one of the things that, especially for me and what I've observed when I've done when I do trainings, especially on sustainability, is that, when we talk about climate change and taking climate action, it's as if like everyone should be relating to it in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But we have really forgotten to make climate change personal for people. People really need to be invited in
Mm-hmm.
and guided to like help them understand, like, why is this meaningful to you? Why do you care about it? Because that is really important to help you decide how you want to show up for it. Because especially as we are in many overlapping crises, um, there is space for everyone to bring their unique interests, gifts, passions, all of that. Um, and so, yeah, so there's something also around like just starting to observe your own cycles in your body, getting to know your own body, and starting to also observe the natural world and seeing um, where you're being mirrored. That I think is so important because um, we need to refine that belonging, that connection, that relationship with nature. Because, yeah, that's the piece that's missing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the piece that's missing. Yeah, yeah. One of the things I've been thinking about and really informed the name of sister season. So, we think about, I don't talk about this that much. I kind of forget it to share it sometimes. Um, but one of the things I really thought about a lot is how, the concept of Mother Nature is like very beautiful to me. I think that it is something that is very enduring and, um, like across our history, it's something that is present in many different traditions and cultures. But for our modern culture right now, um, I think that the dynamic of mother is not very helpful for us because we're not really doing it. It's not inspiring us to take action.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I think that we assume that the mother is the one who gives, the mother is the one who resources. We don't actually have to show up and take care of her. Um, and so there's something just a little cheeky in calling it sister seasons, because I'm really curious, what if we think about the earth as our sister instead, as someone who's actually going through, especially for us as women and menstruators, what we also have lived through, our own lived experience. Would that inspire action more? How would that shift the dynamic and relationship that we have with our planet? Um, because in many ways, the planet has gone through the same thing that we as women have. Um, yeah, the parts of us that are being oppressed are, yeah, are one and the same.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind sharing, or do you have any examples that you would like to share about just sort of like the mirroring as a way to sort of find an entry point into caring about climate change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me think of what feels like the right example today. Hmm. Yeah, so there was this one example that I shared in a workshop that I did, I guess a year or something ago, maybe 2 years, around um, really understanding like the importance of this is going to be a little bit of a nerdy example, but
I love it.
um, around the importance of sea ice and
Mm-hmm.
glaciers on our planet. And I think that's something that we like. We see the image of like the polar bear on like a small sheet of ice, and like the ice is melting. Um, but what's really interesting is like when we think about like we can think about that sea ice, that deep ice, as kind of like Earth's life force, right? And when we look into our own health and well-being, we can think about like what is that life force that is so important for us to preserve, right? And so in traditional Chinese medicine, they would say that's the kidney energy, right? And so in wintertime, which really is the season that our culture loves to skip,
Yeah, it's true.
that that is the time that our that energy, like that it is so important for us to preserve that life force energy. And so, like, um, if we are not taking time as women and menstruators, if we are not taking time during our bleed to rest and restore ourselves. If, as a culture, we are skipping right through winter as this season that just doesn't feel really productive, and we're just gonna, push right through as if it was summer or spring, um, then we are missing this really critical um, uh, time of actually like um, caring for and um, preserving this life force energy, that same life force energy that is so essential to our planet that you can think of as being um, uh, held in the ice of Earth.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so, yeah, there's something really around like um, seeing how like these um, cultural patterns or perspectives around like what is good, what is productive, what is important, um, is also mirrored at like the planetary level, right? So if we're not, we're just as a culture constantly um, spending from our planet and from our bodies savings accounts is a helpful way to think about it, right? And the other seasons, we've got something in our checking account, and you can spend that as you like. But it's really that winter time that is so crucial to our regeneration on our body's level, on our planet, and then on this bigger geological time level, that if we're not honoring, um, yeah, then we're digging into that which will sustain us. That's meant to
Mm-hmm.
sustain us for the long term.
Thank you
Um,
for sharing that. I feel like it's a helpful, when you said it, I felt like it would be such a helpful exercise for people to sort of have as a resource to go into. And so thank you for kind of walking us through the storying of that. I think it's really helpful and
yeah.
really valuable. Um,
Yeah, because I think that there's like something around, when you are reading these headlines about what's happening in climate, that can be really doom and gloom. Um, and we don't actually know like why are they so important to our planet's health. What are the actual systems that are at play?
mhm,
um, because our bodies are also a microcosm of these same systems.
mhm,
And so the more that we can see that connection and understand that also like there's something in us that's sustaining us, there's something within our planet systems that is that is able to sustain life also. Um, these things start to mean something to us. And I think that that's really where we can start to actually um, learn how to care for ourselves better and like understand like, that's why that's important.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not gonna like do like a cardio class on like the first day of my bleed.
Yeah. Yes.
um
Yeah.
yeah, or that's and that is also uh, yeah, that's something at that planetary level starts to become more personal too. Um because it is really for us like easy for us, I think, to mm, keep seeing these things over and over but never really understand like why they are so essential to like the regeneration and continuance of life, whether that's in your own body or at a planetary level.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because it does something besides like, here is a traumatizing headline, now freak out. And it just kind of filters it, brings it into like a really embodied place. Like, I know for me, like one of the things that I care, there's a few places where I find myself really passionate and very mirrored in things going on. And I could care about everything, but like where within my limited scope of focus, attention, and resources, where do I want to put that energy? And food and agriculture is something that I'm like super passionate about because it can sound really vague, but then until you learn like what conventional agriculture does actually to your own physical body, then suddenly it's like, oh, now I really care about this. And that's been a huge so that was sort of an example of one of the things that I've really come to be really passionate about because of just the filtering and the education of like what do I need to know in order to care about this in a way that's very personal, and I'm willing to invest my passion and my time and my energy and my resources into um, living in a way and inspiring others in a way to care about it or to create change around it. And I think the mirroring is a
Hmm.
really helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, and they're happening all the time, and that's why I really feel like if when people ask me like what is the first step on this work, it is really beginning that practice of noticing and observing. And so I teach a daily um, cycle tracking practice of just asking yourself like two questions. The first question is, what have I noticed in the natural world today? And then what have I noticed in myself today? And just beginning to be that observer is so crucial because you start to um, get to know yourself, get to know the natural world around you, and not filtered through someone else's telling you what is true and what isn't true. It's really, um, uh, yeah, reclaiming that ownership of our lived experience, and that actually we know a lot more than we think that we do, and inviting us into that personal relationship with the natural world, because it has so much to teach us.
For
Yeah.
sure. And even just, the way that we are as humans, like so programmed, like with mirror neurons to like observe and like mirror life around us with other
Hmm.
humans and being able to like widen our perspective and our embodied awareness to include like the sister of the earth, as you're saying, into
Hmm.
that mirroring function that we have. Um,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to some of the work. I know you work with individuals, like you have some things that you do for individual people, then also work that you do more organizationally. Do you mind speaking a little bit to how some of what those things are, and a little bit of a how they're the same, how they're different? Because I know sometimes the goals or the outcomes for those um, people ecosystems can be a little different.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So I'll say first that, like, for the most part, um, my work through Sister Seasons is mostly focused on working with groups. So whether that's me offering public events and programs and working with groups of women and menstruators there, or working within organizations or teams, it's the same. And I think that that really stems from a belief that these are collective issues that we are addressing here, whether that's our health and well-being and gender equity and climate. Like, these are not there's so much in our shared experience, and the magic happens when people come together to work on it together. So we've done it. It's important to do your own inner work, and if you're finding that that's not you keep looping on that and trying one thing after another, it's not getting anywhere. That's when it's time to ask, is this my problem or is this our problem?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah. And so through sister season, so I work with individuals and yes, like public events and programs and workshops and things to really again start people on their journey of understanding their menstrual cycle, seeing how that is mirrored in the natural world, both through the natural seasons and using that as a guide for how to take care of yourself, but also looking to climate change and what that can also teach us about how to take care of our period problems. And so, yes, so that is how I work with individuals. I've just started offering one-to-one cycle mentorship sessions. So we'll see how that goes. I'm venturing a little bit into supporting individuals because I do recognize that a lot of this, um, especially around our own bodies, stories can come with a lot of deep emotions, whether that's, we're still working on some shame, some anger, any of that. And I want to make space a lot to hold people in that. So for right now, people can work with me individually if they're interested, but the core of the work really is in groups. And I would say the same is true for my work with organizations. I actually really love going into existing communities and sharing this work. Because there really is something around the conversations that it can open up. And it is one thing for us to learn how to work with our own cycle, but if there isn't a shared understanding around us, it can still feel like a real uphill battle. So those workshops are not just for women and menstruators. I do that, but I also will teach all gender workshops as well. It has really been some of the most fascinating and heartwarming conversations I have had through this work have been with cisgendered men who are very concerned about the menstruators in their life and desperately wanting information. And so I think sometimes when I say that I work with organizations or teams, people are like, but we're going to talk about like our periods
Uh-huh.
at work. And it's like, okay, no one is asking you to tell anyone when you're on your bleed. That is very sensitive information that is yours to decide who you share that with. It is more about raising awareness about these different rhythms and how they can be used as a gift and a tool so that we are collectively building up the energy, capacity, and confidence of women and menstruators to step into climate action, to take on whatever role they feel called to as we build this very radically different future. And yeah, just really helping create the shared language and knowledge so that we can remove some of those obstacles.
For sure. It's like everyone needs to be on board if we're going to invest in a story where there's a regenerative reality. um, it makes
Totally.
me it makes me think of like I was reading this book called what is it called by Johann Hari, and it's all Stolen Focus. And one of my main takeaways from the book was that attention is collective. That it's like, yeah, you can do all of your as much work as you want to focus on a certain thing and have deep work and get into a zone and not be interrupted, but that's only as good as other people honor it. And that's been and that was coming to mind as you were sharing about that it's like if we're not all on the same page or aware of the things we need to be aware of, we can't honor the collective attention or the collective well-being, etc.
Right. Yeah, and that like this is that regardless of your gender, we all have a vested interest in all of us every single person on earth being able to be a part of what we are building towards. And so this is just one aspect of that. This is really around activating women and menstruators. But I think by helping bring in that conversation about our bodies, our connection to the natural world, everyone benefits. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Um, well, as we begin to wind down our conversation, our time together, do you feel like there's anything that you'd like to share with our listeners, with the wider world, that you feel like I didn't make space for, that you would like to come more forward before we start to wrap up?
Mm. I hope that if people have listened to this and they're like, whoa, what's like that? This is a lot of new things, maybe. The one thing that I just hope people take away with is just that idea of even beginning to play with allowing themselves shift to shift with the cycles of their body, to shift with the cycles of nature. And in doing so, it's just like such a way of both, um, I don't know, just like reclaiming this relationship with these like beautiful bodies that are carrying us around every day. But it is also really feels like to me that it's relearning the language of nature.
Mm.
And if we are going to learn to be real partners with the other systems and beings that we are a part of on this planet, we have to relearn that language. And so it might seem really small to just allow yourself to be different, to see, well, like what's here today. But it's when it's done with intention, it can be really radical.
Mm. Yeah, good practice for larger shifts, I think.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering if you would tell the listeners where they can follow you, where you like people to be aware of your work on the internet, and if you have anything coming up that you would like anyone to know about, I'd love if you could share that with everyone.
Yeah. So people can find us on our website at sisterseasons.com. We have an events calendar there so you can see what's coming up. Um, you can also join the waitlist right now for our group cohort program called Regenerate Together. If you want to learn about cycles in the company of some amazing other women menstruators. And you can also we have a free course called Field Notes where you can begin your cycle journaling practice. So if you're curious about how to do that cycle tracking practice that I mentioned, that's a really wonderful free place to start. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. um, and yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. And we'll put all the links to the website, etc., in the show notes below. So be sure to check that out if you're listening, so you can stay in touch with what Sister Seasons is up to. And Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on and sharing more about your work. And I really appreciate it. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you. Same, Grace.